Any utility that I can tell you right now that I've been working with could also tell you that these programs are going to continue. So while we're having discussions with multiple organizations right now about discontinuing some of their programs because of maybe what's happening in the current administration or the lack of federal resources, there has been a stronghold with many utilities who have said our programs are actually working and we are committed to continuing this because we're seeing the profitability and the programs are working for our customers.
I'm Carolyn Parrs, clean tech communicator, coach, and host of Just Power, a podcast about creating a just transition to a clean energy future that leaves no one behind. If affordable, reliable, clean energy that benefits everyone is important to you, you're in the right place, my friend. We have the power to make that happen, and that's what's happening each week on the Just Power podcast. Welcome to Just Power. Hi, I'm Carolyn Parrs, and this is our final show for season 1. Wow. And if I were to name the number one thing that our energy experts have shared, piece of advice they have shared over the last 12 weeks, this would be it. When you're planning or designing an energy system, listen to your communities, especially the underserved ones. Collaborate with them, bring them into this decision-making process, and you'll have better outcomes. You'll have better programs that meet their needs. That was overwhelmingly what they've said. But here's the thing, that doesn't always happen. The people that are designing the energy systems or programs don't always have real interaction with the communities that they're designing for. And that is a dilemma. If we don't understand what they're experiencing, what's affecting them, how they're feeling about it, how can we effectively design an energy system that works for them? So what we're talking about today on this show, if you haven't guessed already, is empathy. The ability to see the world through other people's eyes. And I am so happy that I have brought back on our show a guest, Pamela Fann, who is an award-winning diversity strategist, trainer, and speaker. She's the owner of Integrative Solutions, which is an energy services company focused on project installation, workforce development, and civic engagement. So welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you for having me back. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited to have this. It's like the softer side of energy, but it's so important because so many people create are part of creating systems, right? And often there's a disconnect between the people that they're creating them for. So we're going to talk about that today. Before we get going on the whole subject of empathy, let's kind of define it. So how would you define empathy, let's say specifically in the context of energy systems planning?
Well, I think empathy across the board, you mentioned it, having that softer side, right? And we talk about leaders having soft skills all the time. We talk about what that looks like, but it also extends into employees. No matter what your job, no matter what you do, you should be thinking from an empathetic lens in your work, wondering and thinking through who are your systems designed for, who are your programs designed for, who is your work designed for, who's impacted most by your work. So it really is just training your thinking in a way that is going to design all the outcomes of your work to benefit the most people.
So that's really key, what you said, training your thinking, right?
Yes.
Because you might go to school, let's say an engineer, right? Go to school and really learn all the things you need to learn as an engineer. I am so not an engineer, but there's the softer side, right? There's like left brain, right brain. It's so important because you're designing it for real people, right?
Absolutely.
So how do you train your thinking like that?
So, it just in the way that I do it as a consultant is that I have a lot of conversations that will um that will require empathetic thinking, whether it's through conversations and trainings and like hands-on experiential training. So, in addition to that, you'll find that there are a lot of colleges and universities now that are utilizing this in their engineering
Oh,
programs and in their
fantastic.
programs with their students. Yeah, I actually work with Georgia Tech here in Atlanta, and I know that's something that they're working with their student population, which a lot of engineers come out of Georgia Tech, of course. But when I'm doing it with companies and organizations, it's always about connecting people because you tend to be more empathetic towards those you know than those you don't know, right? And so when you're in a situation and your job is to design a program, you're typically designing it for people that you really don't know. You don't know their day to day. You don't know how they live out their lives. You don't know what's going on in their households. But when you start to engage people in conversations that then with people they do know that may have had an experience, let's say with energy burden, or they themselves may have had an experience with energy burden and they didn't make that connection that that was their experience and that that's what it was called. Then, once people start to personalize it, that's what actually
Mhm.
builds empathy. So it's really through those courses of conversation, as well as some, again, trainings and hands-on experiential trainings that people get to make that connection. For instance, I talk a lot about growing up and visiting my grandmother in Alabama, and this is when I'm working with customers and clients, and I'll say, I grew up going to Gadsden, Alabama every summer to visit my grandmother. And I remember it being really hot during the summer, but my grandmother would never cut the air conditioning on. Or on the rare occasion that she did cut it on, we as kids couldn't run in and out the house. It was like, keep my screen door closed, leave my door closed, you're letting all my air out. So those would be the words that my grandmother used. I didn't know at the time that that was energy burden. And so getting
Yeah.
people to connect with stories and talking about their own experiences is what then starts to bring that empathy. And they're like, oh, well, I might remember a time like that as well. And I didn't realize that that might be what that was.
Yeah. My father used to run around the house saying, "It's a Christmas tree here. Every light of the house is on." And he would,
Absolutely.
right? And I remember that. He had his
Yeah.
own business and he was struggling through the business. We were like, young family and like every dime, everything. And it was like, shut the lights off. So, what did I know, right? I never
Right.
paid a
But that's
bill.
where those connections are actually made, right? So if we get more people to start thinking about energy systems, their role that they play in it, their past connection to it, whether it's through them or through their coworkers, even because that's a big part. So I host these caring conversations, and a lot of times it's through those conversations with their team members. So even if they, in particular, haven't experienced it, if a team member says, "Oh, I remember growing up in another country." And we didn't have electricity. And so I had to do my homework by candlelight, or I had to do it before it got dark. And then they start to really empathize with that. Like, we need to start thinking about who we're actually designing these programs for and how it impacts them.
So true. When I was doing research on this course that I'm designing around energy empathy, I was looking into just some of the tribal nations, and I came across a story of these little boys. They were like grade school kids, and back to they don't have electricity. There's 14,000 people in the nation that still don't have electricity, and they would have to, at night, go out in front of the car or truck that they might have, put the headlights on, and do their homework there.
Yeah.
So like, I was like,
Yeah.
wow,
Like I
right?
gave the example of out of country, but like we have those energy burdens here. We have here in the US, we have communities and families that aren't able to afford their electricity and therefore they don't have power in their homes. Some rural, some urban. And so it is a real problem and it's something that we should be thinking about as we're going out and designing these systems.
Yeah. Yeah. See, all these stories, right? They can really stir you. And this is what we're talking about today. It's empathy that arises in us. And even though we might not have experienced it, we know we might have stories close to us, or even, like I said, in my childhood, and your childhood, some of those things. So, but when we get into organizations, right, and
Mhm.
corporations, what are some of those barriers that might prevent empathy from being centered in energy planning?
I would say that the biggest barrier is the speed of which things need to be done.
Yes.
Well, yeah, so many times when there's a program that needs to be designed or and all of that goes back to money, right? Because organizations and companies are there to make money. They're either there to make money or they want to know how they save money. That is the
Yeah.
structure of business. And keeping that in mind, and we understand that that's how they're going to be able to pay their employees. That's how they're going to be able to get people to work. So that's important. That speed is a factor. And many times in the speed of getting things done, we lose the humanistic element within our work because things just have to get done quickly. So because we've got to get it done quickly, because we got to get these systems in place, because we have to get these programs operating really fast and the turnaround is really quick, we lose some of that empathetic thinking and that humanistic approach to our work. So that's why, I'm really committed to making more empathetic people in organizations. As a part of the way that I train, it hasn't always just been about that standard bias training or what you may call the DEI work, but it's really about making more empathetic people so we can do better decision making for people.
Yeah. Yes. So true. Um, Here's the thing, though. Not everybody has the same barometer or level of empathy. And
Hmm.
that's not a judgment on any level, but sometimes, it tends to live in the right brain, right? So a lot of creatives, right? Artists um, can access that, healers. But when we're talking left brain, which it sometimes very people who lean that way might have more of might more challenging to bring that forth. That this is such a generalization, I just want to say, right? I'm not
Right.
but that is a tendency. So, and if you're used to working in a silo anyway, that can exacerbate that. So, for those people that might be harder than others, right? How can you cultivate it? Like, so you do this work. How do you help cultivate that? Telling stories, you said, is a
Yes.
big way. What else?
Well, and helping just to make the human connection to the work. So sometimes people don't see um, in their own individual roles specifically how their role impacts the overall work. They might think that they're just a small part of it, right?
Right.
I've had engineers tell me, I just build out the program. That's it. I build out the program, or I'm just the numbers guy. I just put in the codes. And so some of the questions that I will ask them is like, well, who, at the end of the day, who does your work benefit? Who is your work more likely to benefit than others? Um, and can you think through what that process might look like? Like if you're designing a program or you're building particular codes, like how does the end user of whatever you're designing um, either benefit, and does it benefit them more than others, or does it benefit others more than them? Because you want to think of, really the benefit for most, and you want to think of, who really needs to benefit from this work. And so I think it really does require asking the right questions and getting people to think differently,
Mm.
because it's a muscle that has to be flexed to like everyone else. And even within your own dexterity within yourself, that's a muscle that you have to flex within yourself. So the more training that you get, the way that you're able to think through your processes, the more that you're able to relate to people. And I think what I typically find is that with anyone's story, if you go and you talk to anyone about their story, whether it's the way that they grew up, it could be the way that, how they went to school, what they studied in college, the friends that they have, you will find some markers within there that actually connect them to that empathetic parts of their being. And that's what you're really trying to get to. So it's going to require
Mhm.
you, as whether a consultant or a leader, to really talk to folks within your organizations, or talk to the people who are working with you and understand like what's important to them about their work. What's important to you about this job? And if they say like, oh, it's just a paycheck, then like where you're starting from ground level. It's just a paycheck. That's what's important to me, is that I come in and I do what you ask me to do every day, and I get paid every 2 weeks. But I think that we're in a system too where we're finding that more often than not, folks have some kind of connection to the work that they're doing. And they want to see,
Their why that's in there,
yeah, they
right?
want to have a why. They see a why to their work. And so, asking questions, being inquisitive,
Maybe
asking
even,
them.
like, asking of, like, what you said is, like, getting them to elicit a story that they've had in their childhood, right? Where
Absolutely.
they can get back into that space
Their
of
childhood,
now.
or could be their, I had someone tell me once that while they couldn't really relate to energy burden, but they remembered going to when they were in college and going to school up north, that their dormitories didn't have
Mm.
any heating systems. And so they were really cold at night, and so had to bundle up in the dorm. I'm like, that, sir, could be considered an energy burden. That could be like having that experience and thinking through what someone who couldn't afford it would experience going through really cold winters. While that was temporary for you, that may be someone's, some people's life experience.
Yeah.
And so, like, even when people don't think
So
that it
connection
connects,
is really what you're saying,
connection is
connecting.
all
Yeah.
it's everything. Connection is all what it's about. When it's thinking through empathy, empathetic people have to see the connection in some sort of way to their own experience,
Yeah.
or to someone they know, or someone they care about, or someone who's a friend.
Yeah.
So we don't develop empathy normally for people that we don't know and don't associate with daily. But
Mm.
if someone we know, someone who's close to us, or is connected through our own experiences in some way, that builds empathy a lot quicker.
Yeah. A real, like, lived experience of it.
Real lived
So
experience. That's why we
so
tell people to connect with communities and work within communities, because we know that once they understand the community's experience, that's going to make them more empathetic, which is going to help them to build out a better program or policy or way in which they work.
yeah. Yeah. Having worked with some utilities, I've seen engineers go out into the community, right? Especially if they're like closing a plant, decommissioning a plant, or that they get involved and it can change everything, right? It's like, wow, the reality of that. Um, and that's all good. But when we can back up into the design phase, right, and start putting some of that in, like, we'll call it an equity lens, right? In an empathy lens. Maybe we should call it an empathy lens
Empathy lens.
these
Yeah.
days. And yeah, and seeing now we can't seeing how it could have an impact on everyone. But here's a dilemma that is rising in my head right now is that engineers and especially in generation they design across systems, big systems for all people, right? So how do we take empathetic design and scale it down, frankly, into those that are working or those areas that are in marginalized areas or legacy areas that they've experienced historically energy burdens bigger than we might ever imagine.
Well, I think for engineers in particular, but this is really for everyone, work the process backwards. Work the process
Reverse
back.
engineer. That's why they call it that, right?
I don't know if I ever knew that that was the concept, but yes.
Yes,
So
that's what
reverse
it is. Start
engineer
from
that
the end
thing.
result and go back.
Start at the end result and think of who am I designing this for and what would they want and how would they potentially want to see it. And then start from there and then move the process back and think like, okay, so am I thinking in the right frame of mind as I'm going into this design, right?
Okay.
So
I like
design with the solution in mind and the audience in mind.
okay.
So that's one way to look at it, and especially if you're doing large systematic programs or changes or processes. So, but the other way is, again, once we start making the more empathetic person, I like to use the self-other system way of thinking through a process that once we work on self and we become more more empathetic and we build our diversity dexterity and we're able
Hmm.
to really think differently about our work, that then impacts the other, which is our exact work, our relationships with people, our relationships within community. And then that in turn impacts the entire system. So if we're all thinking about self, that impacts the other, which is our immediate, which then impacts the entire system, which is everything within the ways of which we work and how we live and how we relate to other people. So again, I'm a big proponent of when I'm working with organizations and companies and people with making sure that we are working on creating better people that then create better programs and create better policies that then create
Mm,
better systems.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
So it starts with the self, right?
first with self.
Yeah. It always does.
It
It always.
always does. Starts with
Darn.
self. The man in the mirror, Michael Jackson says, starting with the man in the mirror, because that's what's going to make the change.
Right. Exactly. Love that. So you talked a little bit earlier about the speed dilemma, right? Like,
Mhm.
how would you respond, let's say, to critics who might see empathy as slowing down this really urgent climate action, right? That we're in, or adding what they would think are unnecessary costs. That's, the double whammy. What would you say to them about this work?
I will say that we have to take the time to ensure that programs, policies, processes uh, that we're considering the impact on people before we implement. Same thing like if you were in your organization starting to implement agile processing or agile project management, right? So you want to do it while you want to do it quickly, you want to go through the process very strategically, and so that you don't have to go back and then repeat some of the processes and things and gaps and things that you missed. So I would say the same thing here. Like when you go too fast, then you're going to have gaps. You're going to have things that you miss along the processes. And those mistakes are then going to cost you dollars.
That's right.
And then, it's going to cost you money, what we don't want to lose. It's not going to be likely the more efficient way of doing things. It's going to be the quickest way, but was it more efficient? Not necessarily, and likely not. And so going at a slower speed and as an agile adoption, if we want to think about it through those terms, it really does allow you to think about each process in which you're doing it and think about, did we miss a step? Did we miss a step here? So it's going to save you money. It's going to be more efficient in the long run. I mean, if we really sit and we're honest with all of this, Carolyn, people have been working on low to moderate income programs
Forever.
since longer than you and I have probably been working in this sector, and they still have not gotten it right.
Right.
You know why? Because we haven't brought in the right voices. We haven't heard the right solutions. We haven't started with the end in mind. And I think we're finally, over the last couple of years, starting to really pay attention to that. And some of these programs are paying off. They're starting to see an increase in program adoption. They're starting to see profitability behind these programs. Why? Because we started starting to engage the people who the programs were designed for. And that
Any examples of that?
That is having an empathetic lens in thinking through the design process of building an equitable process and designing with empathy in mind. Yes, and just giving examples of that, we can say for sure that any program right now, there's a low to moderate income program. I think we were on one of your calls, which comes to mind like just immediately, talking with SMUD, who just so happened to be able to really think through equity design and build it into their program design work. And then it's literally transformed their business, and they've been able to be profitable from that. So, there's not one case that I can tell you from an organization that I've worked with that when they've thought in this manner or they've implemented in this manner, that it has not been profitable for them, or that their programs, any utility that I can tell you right now that I've been working with could also tell you that these programs are going to continue.
Yeah.
So while we're having discussions with multiple organizations right now about discontinuing some of their programs because of maybe what's happening in the current administration or the lack of federal resources, there has been a stronghold with many utilities who have said our programs are actually working and we are committed to continuing this because we're seeing the profitability and the programs are working for our customers. Coca-Cola even recently mentioned in a news article that they were not dismissing any of their diversity and DEI work because it has shown to be profitable, and it would be a profit loss for them if they moved forward with discontinuing any of this work. And so, I think there's examples across the board, even though I didn't give you one specific
There's
one.
so many of them, right? You mentioned SMUD, right? I mean, they've been at it for 80 years. Okay. So they're really good at it. That's it. I mean, they've been working this. It works for them. And so much so that they keep on expanding it and more in millions of, I think they're in $70 million investments now to expand that. So they
And
wouldn't be putting that money in after all those years,
right.
right?
Would they
If it weren't
continue
making
to
some money
invest in it?
anyway. Yeah.
Just like you said, would they be continuing to invest in this if it wasn't profitable and if it wasn't working for their customers?
Yeah. Well, maybe maybe with all that's going on, we'll see the spotlight of that more and more. We have to get these stories out more and more.
Absolutely.
And that's why we're talking about it today. Uh, Let me ask you as we begin to wrap up, are there frameworks or tools in empathy training that maybe some of our listeners might say, hey, we really like to dive into this. How do we get started?
Aside, I think from bringing in a consultant, if you don't feel comfortable having the conversations and building more empathetic
Right.
folks, I think you'd want to bring in someone to help guide those conversations and help your teams to think through cohesively, like how do we do this as a team? How do we make sure that we're thinking on a humanistic level and thinking with the end in mind? Right? As we're designing these programs, you may want to get consultation on that if you don't necessarily know how to do it. But I would implore teams and really individuals to really sit down and think about their work and how they do their work every day. One of the things that I love to ask folks when I'm at conferences and events is how are you thinking about equity within your work every day? How are you thinking? And you might say, "Oh, I'm really not." And I'm like, "Well, then how does your work connect to benefiting the most people? How do the most people benefit from the work that you do?" You
Yeah.
know? And so I think it's in asking those questions, and that's something that you should be asking yourself every single day when you're doing your job. Like, so, I used to work for the Coca-Cola company, and one of the things that we had to be ready to answer if any leader walked by or our manager was how we were adding value to the company every day. And I think it's almost the same thing within this work. It's like, how are you thinking about your customers? Your customers are the primary focus of it. Without customers, none of us could do this work.
That's right.
We all have
Right.
customers and clients that we support. So, how are you thinking about your customers every day? How are you bringing the best value and benefit to your customers every day with the work that you in particular do?
If you're
And
not thinking about this, what we're talking about, you're really not thinking about all your customers, is really what you're saying, right? Because this is part of, their lives, right? And the whole point is to make their lives better, right? Enhance their lives or fix a problem. So this is really customer work.
which
Um,
which in turn is going to raise your customer satisfaction rates. It's going to raise your profitability. You're going to see an increase in dollars. It's probably going to save you some money because you had a more efficient process because you started with the end in mind and you didn't have to go back and redesign,
Yes.
or you didn't have to hire 20 million consultants to tell you what to do, like because you've put in the work and you kind of know now what to do. And so I think if you put in the work in the beginning and you develop a really strong process of how you're thinking
Mhm.
about program design, project design, policy design for your organization, you really will become more effective. Your customer satisfaction rates are going to go up. Your profitability is going to be better, and it's going to make you a better all-around company for it.
And a better all around person, I would
And a
think.
better all-around person,
People
which is what
invite you
we're
to more
really trying to
parties.
get at. Yes, we want better people.
Better people on the planet. uh,
Absolutely.
wow, thank you so much. There's so much more we could talk about here. But it really sounds like like you're in the heart of it, right? And I wanted to like let you share like how people might be able to work with you or more about your work around this whole empathy area and
Yeah.
cultural competence, as you've called it
Yeah,
before.
cultural competence. And so through our civic engagement work, that is a lot of the work that we do is, again, building more culturally competent people, thinking through, how programs are designed, how processes are designed, how policies are designed. And through cultural competency within an organization and building out those frameworks, you can really look at how do we do this internally, but then how do we do this externally? How does this impact our programs? How does it impact the people that we work with, our suppliers even? How does it impact our customers? So you do want to start internally, and you want it to really be kind of like an ebb and flow of the way of which you work. You want to tackle it internally with your people and have your people start thinking through how they are considering this business and considering the work that they do and how they're impacting people every day with their work. But then you also want to
Mhm.
put in processes and designs that really impact the people that you're doing it for. So it really it's tackling it in two ways, and that's something that we've been doing now for over 6 years, working within this industry in the energy sector. Not only working within the industry sector, but we've done this within education. You heard me mention a university, but we work with several universities. We've done it with transit authorities. We've done it with communities and community members as well as municipalities. And so it's just really important in just engaging. And let's think about like the humanistic approach to all of this work. Somebody is either going to benefit or they might suffer because of the decisions that you make within the role that you were in.
Yeah.
And wouldn't we want everyone to benefit in some way? And while it may not hit everybody, we want to do what's best for the best outcomes for most people.
Right.
Period. The best outcomes for most people. So that's what we should be thinking about in our work. And we're happy to help you all with that. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, Pamela Fann. I'm on LinkedIn, 2 N's, Fann. And yeah, happy to connect with anyone who's interested in continuing to do this work.
Right on. And so we'll have your contact information also in the show notes. Check them out there. And just a point before we wrap up, I wanted to say, because you said something about benefiting the most people, that and we've talked about SMUD too, right? So I'm going to combine those things because there's a person there, Shiloh, right? Her name is Shiloh Costello, that says when they design programs that they actually design them for the people that need them most, right? Because that's going to be the most, they have the most burden, right? So start there and then it gets easier from that. So that could be helpful to begin where it hurts the most.
I say that all the time. One of my favorite quotes, which I think this is actually my quote, is that if we start solving problems for those most vulnerable, the rest of this work becomes easy.
I love it.
So that's what we have to always think about is, most vulnerable folks, if we design the processes and procedures and programs for those, the rest of the work comes easy and we'll find that everything will tend to fall in place after that.
That's a great place to end on a high note there. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about this. I love these topics. I think this is such it's a missing piece. Not to say that it's not always it's happening on some level, but there's so much more that can be done to make it so much better for all of us in our energy systems. So it's the beginning of that conversation. So thank you so much for coming on. And thank you for joining us, as always, on Just Power. If you liked this show, share it with a friend. You can show how much empathy you have in your heart. Share it with a friend. Share it with a colleague. And please, also, if you really loved it, write us a review. That would mean the world to us. So thank you for joining us. The end of season 1. Watch out for season 2. We're going to come back with a whole other theme that's still involved with equity, but another theme. So stay tuned for that. All right. But remember, as always, we are all in this together.
Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe to Just Power wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really loved it, leave us a review and tell everyone you know about our podcast. It's going to take all of us to create a clean energy future that leaves no one behind.
The Just Power podcast is brought to you by New Mexico State University and Mind Over Markets, helping clean energy, clean tech, and regenerative businesses craft clear and compelling messaging that scales. Want to continue this conversation with Carolyn? Follow her on LinkedIn and follow the Just Power podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and on our YouTube channel. And for more intriguing conversations, follow New Mexico State University's micro-learning social pages on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube.